Welcome to the next session, which is about transition in mobility. I'm Suvojoy Sengupta, CEO of AECOM in India. I think for me, this is a very personal because when 2011, when at the beginning of FAME 1, I was involved in advising the Ministry of Heavy Industries at that time on how it is to be set up. And I was also I bought my first EV in 2013, and I've been a enthusiastic EV owner and user ever since. And it's been great to see how the transition has progressed in India over this period of time. We have a very experienced and distinguished panel with us today over the next 45 to 50 minutes. Will take us through it. I just wanted to make some initial framing comments and then invite my co-panelists to share their thoughts. We'll take a couple of questions and then open it up to the audience for any questions. So overall, I think this is not, mobility transition is not a luxury for India. It is an imperative on multiple topics. Of course, decarbonization is very important. At the same time, energy security, given that huge amount of our crude oil imports, come from outside. So anything we can do to transition to alternate sources of energy helps stabilize the economy. It is also a big public health imperative, given, of course, you are in Delhi and we know about the pollution issues. And that the cost of logistics as a percentage of GDP is quite high, and any innovation we can do to bring that down has a very positive impact on the economy. It is also true that the transition path in India in mobility is been different compared to some of the other more developed economies. There's a large number of two-wheelers and three-wheelers where we have achieved TCO parity, and that's where we see taking off. Electric buses has been an interesting experience as well. However, it is not limited to electric mobility. There is biofuels, of which the Honorable Minister in the inaugural session talked about. There is LNG, there is hydrogen. So there's a wide range of solutions that we can think about as it comes towards India. So there's, of course, it's a vast topic. We will not have time to cover everything, but at this stage, I would move to my co-panelists and ask them to take 3 to 4 minutes each to share their perspective. I think we'd start with Mr. Behuria. You've had many decades of experience in the energy and the mobility sectors of India. You've seen the entire transition. How do you see the overall landscape? Given it's not just electric, it's not just cars. What do you see the opportunities, sir?
No, I think, as you said, thank you very much for inviting me. I think energy security for all of us means many things. For me, it has been actually, I spent most of my life, almost 45, 50 years, in the energy space of fossil fuels, marketing, refining of petroleum products. India has been, as you already said, that overly dependent on imports of crude oil. At one point in time when I joined, our dependence was less than 50%. Today, it's almost reaching 88, 90%. The entire incremental demand has come through the imports of this country. One of the things that India and all of us in the oil industry have done is we have created a huge infrastructure to see that the petroleum products are available right across the country on a 24/7 basis. Whether it is petrol, diesel, LPG, which you are all aware, we are now almost 100% penetrated. So in this transition, of course, now we have a bigger challenge, not just energy security, but the energy transition, decarbonization. I think the issue about energy transition first took place almost 25, 30 years ago when this was gas, the CNG was marketed, and Delhi is the classic example. Within the oil industry, we moved to low sulfur Bharat's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to reduce pollution in transportation and industry. But I think the real transition took place when we started marketing CNG, the natural gas, which again India's now 6%, created a huge infrastructure of terminals importing almost 50 million tons, 25 they import, where we are lucky to have almost 50% indigenous still. So the energy transition is very challenging now. We're not talking of just the traditional fossil fuels, but also we've now moved from CNG to biogas. EV is a very big, which we'll talk about, is the new thing. And I've heard the earlier speakers talk about the renewable part, which is also particularly solar and hopefully the wind. The offshore wind will probably give us that challenge. So I think it's very exciting, but I want to say that fossil fuels will remain the mainstay. We see the peak coming earlier. We thought maybe in about in 10 years, but we now see, at least in India, it will take us at least 15 years. Although the rate of growth of consumption of both diesel and petrol will keep coming down, but there'll be a slight growth. Diesel may come down to about 2-3% because of CNG, LNG, and also petrol because of the EVs, which we'll talk about. But I think there's enough opportunity for all, and the challenges of energy transition, on the other hand, maintaining the supply security, which we should not let go, where I think the traditional oil companies who are aware of it and are investing a lot of money in their traditional refinery expansion, petchem, to make the entire investments profitable. So I'll stop here. I said it's a very challenging. I don't think we can speak the whole day about energy transition, but when we talk of energy transition, at the base is our need to keep the supplies going and to see that the energy security in this country, the accessibility, the affordability part is taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Behuria. I'll move to Mr. Vishal Kapoor, who is the CEO of EESL, and EESL has been at the forefront of innovation in both energy as well as mobility. And I think one of the key challenges here, the Achilles heel on the power distribution sector, which is the adequacy of the infrastructure and availability of power. How do you see those challenges? What are some of the ways that EESL has innovated? And especially, I think, bringing the concept of grid stability along with mobility through the convergence type of efforts that you've done.
Thank you, Suvojoy. I think these are two very important things, because when we substitute a direct fossil fuel based transportation system into direct electricity based systems, then obviously you do require the whole system to be able to feed into that infrastructure. And exactly in major cities today, there is a problem of distribution transformer installation. Cities like Mumbai, cities like Delhi, which are actually at the forefront of accelerating the ecosystem. So in case if there is a capacity augmentation required, there is definitely a problem. So there are technical solutions underground, substations, and those kind of technologies are available. But the larger challenge is, I think, not the generation, because there are various estimates. CA estimates around 18 gigawatts of additional uh, power capacity to come in, and that generation can meet it, but transmitting it down, transmission can also meet it. The challenge will lie at the distribution level. How do we do it? And there are some estimates that they suggest even as high as 30 gigawatts by 2030. So these are challenges, and that will have to be uh, done up. And distribution utilities, state-owned, are predominantly state-owned in India, and obviously in the overall resource adequacy frameworks that we are dealing with right now, the power sector is dealing with right now, coupled with adequate capacity expansion, looking at funds in the specific funds or cess in the electricity tariff to create some kind of space, because electric mobility is a public good. And so right now, let's say the EVCI infrastructure, the industry has to pay for it, and that's why the tariffs go up. But since right now, the issue is with that issue is that there are less number of EVs, so it's fine. But as long as the EV ecosystem increases, the adaptability and adoptability of EVs increase, it will increasingly become not a niche segment product, but will get socialized over a period of time. So I think there might be a case for planning adequate capex into the system, because even in the EVCI infrastructure, there are estimates that would say that almost a lakh crore worth of investments, predominantly coming in from the private sector, will have to come in till 2030 to do that. But then the feeding of these charging infrastructure, I think that the feeder level inputs and the capex planning by the distribution utilities is it's going to be extremely important as we go forward.
Thank you. I think we'll move to Minji now. And you've seen, of course, you're familiar with India, with activities of Shell, but also many other countries in the region and emerging markets as well as developed markets. I think in India we tend to think that we are following a slightly different path compared to others. Would you agree to that, or are there some lessons that from other countries that you've observed that can be learned and applied in India?
Well, thanks for joining us in this panel interview. My name is Min Yi, and some of you might know that I'm a Singaporean born and raised in Singapore. But despite that, I have the privilege of living in 3 different continents in the last 2 decades, and I have the vantage position of seeing a lot of developments, not just in conventional business, but also in the lower carbon business around the world. You might know that I'm part of the global leadership team right now, and that has given me a privilege of being able to lead the Asian business for mobility across 10 direct markets and more. But because we are the face of Shell in mobility, we probably reach the most customers in the company. And that has brought us to understanding what is happening in the market. And understanding that allows us to adapt our solutions locally. What matters to me, and something close to my heart, is about how do we manage the business and the company through the energy transition. It is a big topic for us. We are confronting it and taking the lead in many areas. But something close to my heart is how do we ensure that we succeed as we go through it and thrive in the energy transition, which then brings us and myself and my team into trying to see where we can play to our strengths and succeed. And definitely in the e-mobility space, this is an area that we are very interested. I have to admit, over the last 6-7 years, even pre-COVID until now, we have learned a lot of lessons. We have made mistakes, but we have made certain moves that are better than mistakes, and we are able to expand our position. You might have heard in India that we are more than filling stations, and that really runs true because we believe that just because we have the network of service stations across every market, it doesn't mean that we are going to be static. We are going to manage it in such a way that it becomes destinations in many cases. That's what matters. And at the end of the day, if you ask me for 3 words that we believe, and I personally believe very strongly, it's really about how do we power progress together. That to me is more than just a slogan. It's about really reaching out to the community, with the government and across industries to go forward. And you ask a pertinent question about how then do we see ourselves in India and beyond India. That to me is an exciting space because I can safely say that from my vantage point, what is happening in Singapore, a small country of 6 million, and what is happening in India, in different cities, and what is happening in China are very contrasting. But equally importantly, it's about the commonalities that we can take advantage of. And where are they? It is about ensuring that when we make investments related to e-mobility or lower carbon solutions, it must be acceptable to the government and the people. It must be at pace with the society that we serve, our customers and ourselves. And that's how we play in the long game, because it is very difficult in a nascent sector like e-mobility, electric mobility, for us to expect returns within 5 years. But we know how to do them now. And that is what is wonderful. And by learning what we have done in China, Singapore, India, and frankly, in my previous job in Netherlands, UK, and America, we can apply lessons that we have failed, lessons that we have succeeded, and make sure that we are able to multiply the success factors for us. Last but not least, I would say that it really is about ensuring that there is convenience as we go forward. It is, at the end of the day, about the drivers, the motorists, and the non-drivers. How do we ensure that they are assured and also have a comfortable environment when we are providing the electricity that they need? So that's probably a quick snap of what we intend to do and how we want to win in Shell.
Thank you very much. I'll turn to Vignesh now, and you've had experience in investing in the e-mobility sector as well as now in renewables, and both are quite relevant because it's still the Indian grid is 70+% coal. So while moving to e-mobility, are we really addressing decarbonization? And there's many studies around this, etc. But obviously there's a public health benefit of doing that. But how do you see the evolution of these two, the energy transition and the mobility transition hand in hand, from your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Suvojoy, and good to be here. You mentioned about the transition, and the transition story, as Mr. Sarthak said, started a while ago. It's energy is something that we will continue to see a demand growth in India for the next 2-3 decades, if not more. In my experience, we were in the fund, one of the early large ticket investors in e-mobility. We believed in it because the unit economics made a lot of sense in about 60-70% of the sectors. But we had a chicken and egg problem. Right? You could not invest a lot more without the demand, and you did not see demand till you had the right products, and to get the right products, you needed the distribution and the capex investment. I think it's safe to say across the globe, and not only in India, we have moved past that. Now it's no longer, is there a chicken and egg problem? Will there be pockets where you still need to do it? Yes, but the playbook is understood, and it is no less a testimony of the investment community, but also the technology community and large corporations. Reliance, Shell. We had at one point of time all the majors looking at how they could support this. Today, where I see the conversation is shifting is the energy security piece has an angle where you see sustainability as security as well, right? And why do we say that? Because as with India, the demand for energy and for mobility continues to increase. As in India, with the rest of the world, the demand and the need for fossil fuels continues to increase. And I don't see a world where it is going to be totally irrelevant at all, right? So the question is, how do we sustainably use these resources and increasingly use them where it is not possible to have a transition day after tomorrow, right? And I think mobility, because the chicken and egg problem has been resolved to a large extent in many phases, is now at the forefront of saying, can we sustainably transition the energy as well? And that is very much needed from a security angle. So the tailpipe emissions have come down, but as you said, the grid is still largely powered by fossil. And I do see, and we have seen working business models as early as 2018, 2019 when we invested, and now it's only gone further ahead, where powering the grid with renewable is sustainably possible across multiple time zones, right? The other transition that I see, Suvojoy, is the fact that technology, data, the internet and the distribution systems can be so much more integrated today than they were before. And with the advent of AI, I've seen some very interesting models that start predicting vehicular traffic, therefore forecasting energy needs, and therefore can the grid be a stabilizing force? Can we incentivize consumer or operator behavior so that we stabilize the grid with V2G kind of models? This was thought to be 10-15 years away, and increasingly we see that's going to get accelerated. There are models that are working in other parts of the world, and India, I think, it can definitely do it because our data coverage, our data costs, and our penetration of IoTs has been much faster in the distribution system than ever before. So, as I see it, the transition story of not only tailpipe emissions, but the source of powering these vehicles is being possible only because the whole angle of product and delivery is being solved or we know how to solve it. Now investments are possible that will see demand, and therefore energy sustainability as energy security is a very key factor that will drive the next phase, I feel.
Thank you very much. Finally, to Shailendra, I think, of course, the story of the Indian automotive industry is well known as a thriving domestic market and domestic manufacturing of the traditional ICE powertrains and components. And for the electric mobility side as well, there's been investments and production-linked incentives, etc. How do you see it that like the manufacturing ecosystem developing in India, and not just manufacturing, there's also a lot of talk and some early interesting startups on the whole kind of full cycle of the life cycle of the battery and disposal and so on. How do you see that ecosystem developing, and what opportunities do you see in that?
Sure. So thank you, Mr. Sengupta. So I picked up few keywords from my fellow speakers. We have Mr. Behuria talking about energy security. Min was kind enough to share his experience, what comes from the globe. We heard about sustainability and AI, and we also heard from powering from the grid. I want to break the layer further. So first we'll have to see on the mobility front what goes inside the vehicle and what goes outside the vehicle. That's one data set. The second data set is there is a voice of society, there is voice of industry, and then there is voice of user. So user says, okay, it should make moral sense, but it should also make economic sense. Probably industry, they would say, okay, we would want to put the money with the help of government, but at some point of time, they will either collaborate or draw a line. We saw it happening in some of the continents. I'll touch base on that. And then, of course, the society has to decarbonize, has to have energy security. So there are multiple variables working at all the hand. But when we see from the industry and what's shaping up in India, it's very well known that two-wheelers and three-wheelers are adopting a lot of electrification. The bigger vehicles, the four-wheelers and others, are primarily right now on alternate fuels and less on electrification. I know for sure some of our solutions work on LNG too. So the lot of component manufacturing in India for e-mobility is a pretty large contributor to the GDP, like the automotive world. Almost 50% of the manufacturing GDP comes from here. The most of the component manufacturings I know are putting up their capacity right now to export. The domestic consumption right now is not in line of the capacities which are getting built up, and the hope is that India would pick up and people would use their capacity even for the domestic. When I look at the OEMs who are rolling out the vehicle, that's even more interesting. We are seeing emergence of a lot of new players who are now coming in. The competition is now horizontal, vertical, and much more, and a lot of inventions happening there. I would say we have a lot to learn from the economies which has successfully implemented. One such economy is our friendly neighborhood from our neighboring country, China. The number of electric vehicles they roll out per year is equal to the number of total four-wheelers we roll out in a year. The commercial vehicles over there have already electrified, whereas India right now is talking about biofuels and LNG. And when I speak to my colleague in China, what is driving their adoption, and it's primarily oil imports are 70% plus. By the way, is 80% plus for us, which is one of the big contributor. Exactly same in Korea. We are also, from our experience, saying that Europe is adopting, not as much as what they were projecting earlier. So we would see some delayed adoption. Alternate fuels are also playing very important role. Typically, hybrid is now coming up. We will see a lot of LNG and hydrogen too. And if some of you have time, visit the booths here. You'll see a lot of action around there. And we heard in the previous communication, right now there's a disparity, TCO break and others. So hopefully someday there'll be a parity. So I'll stop here because I'll give opportunity others to speak.
Thank you very much, Shailendra. So we'll move into the next part of the discussion where I think picking up from some, very important points that look, this transition is not new, as Mr. Behuria said, it started with CNG. So it's been an ongoing journey in India. And so electric is just the next version of that, and maybe, who knows, going into hydrogen and other things. And one important point which was raised is around financing. So I'll just, pick up a couple of the themes and pose a question in any sequence to the panelists, whoever wants to pick up, and maybe two or three different views on this. I think both from the battery vehicle charging infrastructure, transmission and distribution, this is not going to be cheap. So there was, I think, a figure of 1 lakh crore with Mr. Kapoor, which is about $12 billion investment, and largely has to come from the private sector. What are we seeing in terms of innovative financing models, sources of funding, what needs to be done, or your ideas on how to make some of these investments more bankable in order to accelerate the transition? Anybody wants to go first?
I wanted to just midpoint view that I think most of us, we're talking now about electric mobility, EV, we've done very well. All of us have done the two-wheeler space, three-wheeler space. In terms of charging opportunities, most of them are home charging. So all of us here who are in this mobility business are looking at opportunities of outside charging, which are available mostly for the four-wheelers. Now, I think the real issue, in my view, as far as India is concerned, is the affordability. Not infrastructure will be in place. I mean, we have created infrastructure in the entire mobility space, whether it is fossil fuel, LNG, CNG, LNG, CBG. And there is no doubt that here, not just the oil companies, even the automobile companies are working on it, whether it's charging, the government support. But the real issue, in my view, is the affordability of the vehicle rather than anything else. Today, out of about 4 million vehicles that we sell, almost 50% are people's car at less than 10 lakhs rupees. Unless we have the Altos and the our WagonRs of the world country coming in at that price point, whether you fund or not fund, I don't think it is going to work. And that is where I think companies like Maruti and all are working at it. If I were to say that what should be one KRA or KMP that we should have for success of e-mobility is how many single car owners are going to have an electric vehicle. If we are able to crack that and use as a single point index as to the success of e-mobility in terms of four-wheelers, I think we will get there. Otherwise, I mean, two-wheelers will always be there. Within two-wheelers also, we have a challenge on the motorcycles yet. It will probably happen. But the four-wheeler in India, being in India, as we know, is only if we are able to bring down the price from 20 plus to at least 10 plus. And that's, I think I want to say that.
I can't agree more because there are 3 points that we try to tackle as we get into the e-mobility space. One is about availability, the second is about reliability, and the third is actually investability. The issue now is we are not at a steady state industry cycle. And that's the reason why we need to consider where we can provide the charges, but that's seriously necessary but insufficient. Right? The second one is about the reliability of these charges. And thankfully for us, we have reached 98% charging success in India for the charges that we provide. And the third one is really cost and economics. And how do we do that? And that to me is the challenge in terms of supply and demand. In a very broad sense, it's about demand, consumption, number of e-vehicles, usage. And the supply side, to me, is the infrastructure side. whether you have the chargers to provide assurance against range anxiety and so on. So these are the areas that are critical at a minimum to make this really an acceptable proposition. And thankfully for us, in Shell, as of now, we are 1 year ahead of schedule in terms of our number of charge points around the world. As of now, proud to say, 2024 end, we have about 70,000 charge points, charges, and charge points of 70,000 make us the leading retailer, not just in conventional fuels, but also in charge points and so on. So that gives us a lot of credibility and also history in order to further multiply this. And that, to me, at the end of the day, is about the customer experience, because we need to ensure that the range anxiety is actually diminished over time. And in some countries where it is ahead of the curve, you can see a huge exponential growth of e-mobility. But much to be done, much is said, but there's a lot of actions to bring strategy onto the ground.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
in fact, I think
Sorry,
No,
Vishal.
please go ahead.
it's very interesting you brought up the point of KRA, and I want to use my renewable energy bias and talk about some KRAs we had discussed with the government around 2008, 2009 circa. I think you were possibly involved in the National Solar Mission as well, Suvojoy. And I remember one of the questions is, at what point does it become affordable that small business and individual homeowners can use solar? Otherwise, it doesn't make sense, right? Because it's a benefit of decentralization. And likewise with wind, when does this become affordable? I don't think the problem of intermittency has gone away. What was there 15 years ago is still there, but technology has rapidly advanced. And one learning on financing we can take from renewable is that, as with all energy infrastructure, there is massive impact that the government and the policies can do, right? The reason we have so much penetration in distribution grid and petroleum being available is it was a thoughtful investment in that infrastructure with private participation. It was not all government alone. And renewable can show us the way even in terms of mobility transition. In that, I think we can do two or three things, and I've shared this, and hopefully we can take this dialogue forward from here. One is demand comes when it is affordable, right? So there are pockets within the mobility sector that you make it affordable, particularly in the bus and trucks, where they're very conscious. And India is one of the most cost-conscious markets. So if you succeed here, you're going to succeed in many parts of the world. If we can bridge through a combination of government, financing, and private infrastructure, this gap that is there on unit economics, and we can do it today better than we can do it 10 years ago because data is available. You can understand utilization. And if financing can be at least 50% towards utilization rather than only capex, I think you start creating demand. The second thing that we can do is really support technology advances, because there's a lot of question of do we need the latest technology? Let's use older technology. But there's a terminology in renewable that has really pushed the cost down, which is called levelized cost of energy. So if there's a levelized cost per kilometer, that is the KPI and driver. For different segments, it will be different. But if financing starts to target that, I think we will see massive strides, both from government and private. And lastly, you talked about consumer user experience. A lot of that, the range anxiety, the charging infrastructure, what we saw when we were investing into e-mobility networks in 2019-20 versus what I see today, just 5 years. There were cars that were 130 kilometers on a single charge then, and today we have 500 kilometers on a single charge. I am a big believer that technology has the ability to solve this. So I think consumer experience will get there. We do a lot more with this phone today than we did 15 years ago. So that part I am less skeptical about. The part that I think needs a lot of collective hands is in addressing the financing by looking at demand creation and looking at, addressing the levelized cost angle.
Per kilo. Vishal.
So I would tend to agree with all the panelists, and this is borne out not only in renewables but also in the journey that we undertook on behalf of the STUs aggregating demand, getting into kind of levelized tariffs over a period of time for 12 years. So when you look at a period of, let's say, 12 years for an electric bus, and obviously electric bus as a commodity life of about 12 to 15 years as per so 12 years is a long enough period of time. The problem with the real challenge lies in the smaller vehicles, four wheelers, where where the life you'd like to take out all the money in about 5 or 6 years, and the real problem emanates from still the banking, and this is what we get from our interactions with various banking and finance based institutions. They are still skeptical about the end of life value. Now, there is a lot of opportunity of about, at least in the near term, 20,000 crores. This is what some estimates suggest, that the end of life battery can be utilized for stationary energy supply and usage, and that too with the stationary battery ecosystem also developing. I think that thing is now developing, and some pilots or some experiments need to be done in that space, so that the end of life or 5 or 6 years of market develops better. And even on the other side, I think India has somehow been slow, even in diesel, CNG or petrol vehicles. We have not been able to develop a lease market. MG has recently done something, at least on the battery front, on an OPEX basis, which is a kind of I would say, a hybrid model. But I think if we are able to do this, and as Vignesh ji just said, a levelized tariff for a car that is a lease, and if we are able to develop that, I think that will definitely help to a great extent. And one thing that we are actually missing in the whole narrative is that, I mean, in terms of individual offtakes of EVs, uh, probably may not be possible when there is a large fleet operation happening, bus, maybe even trucks, and let's say if a big lease market for cars develops, and with the changing systems and this formulation of the carbon compliance market in India, I think that could become a great impetus, if not into direct carbon financing, but to reduce the future investment cost by leveraging the carbon credits from the earlier projects into big fleets. So I think that equation is is still evolving, needs to be solved. But what gives happiness is the way the battery prices are coming down. LFP saw almost around 20% reduction over the past 1 year. The NMC cells seen 10% lesser, but still okay. And we assume that, as was said earlier, that we need WagonR versions of cars. That's extremely important, because we need to democratize EVs amongst not the rich people or the urban middle class, upper middle class, but actually the bottom of the pyramid, if not the bottom of the pyramid, at least the middle class, because that will offtake, and they will go in for WagonRs at those prices. Even though there are some estimates that say it will take about 2, 3 or 4 years for the price parity to come with the declining prices of the batteries and other electric components. But till that time, 4 years, we can't keep on sitting. We need to get into the lease business and keep on driving down the prices through some extent. Thank you.
Shailendra.
So a lot has been spoken from the user side, and we know a lot of investments lease model. but one of the biggest expense for energy transition would actually come from R&D. And so, no single company will have deep enough pocket to reach to the extent they would want to. So we will see some innovative collaborations happening. Lot of competitors are now coming together and sharing platform. We already heard of that. I know for sure a lot of OEMs are tying up with fleets, ride-hailing apps. We will see that. But what is important in R&D, and just to give a small view, the electrification and LNG would reduce the number of bearings in a vehicle, but they will not eliminate it. And the cost of testing one bearing is more than $1 million, since the vehicle has to come out safe and sound in the market. And so eventually now when we are seeing so many vehicles are getting invented, you can imagine the amount of money which will be required in the R&D for all kind of fuels, not necessarily only electrification. And that is where I believe public private partnership will have to play a role. Sometimes competitions would have to come together and share platforms, and modularity will play a very big role over there. And I personally believe that interoperability and standardization will be one big bottleneck for us to solve, because different vehicles will use different charging point, different this thing. At some point of time, there is a standardization required. So that's from my side. Over to you.
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. I think we have a couple of minutes. Any questions from the audience? One or two very quick questions. Yes, please.
Let's say cheaper or something. So I just got up an idea that, for example, if someone is buying a petrol or diesel car, okay, so they, let's say they buy it at around 10 lakh rupees, and the electric car is coming at around, let's say, 15 lakh rupees. So can we have something sort of a tax incentive for the personal users, wherein they can claim around 1 lakh of the rupees, let's say 20,000 per annum through their tax return? And if we can do such sort of thing, so if they see the payback period, let's say if it was 7 years, but this I might think it might come to 5 years. So this sort of some solution wherein we are also increasing the people to pay taxes also, and there is some sort of incentive for them to pay.
Yeah.
So I think this can sound a bit good or great idea. I
No,
don't
it's
know.
good.
It depends on the implementation side.
May I share
Yeah, please.
my perspective? Because, of course, who am I to tell every government what to do? But I can share what is happening in other countries.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's important. And the short answer is that for low carbon industries, whether it is e-mobility or not, it is number one, dependent on the marketplace. Number two, dependent on government policies. And one very good example is what is happening with exponential growth in China. I don't know whether it is a good example, but what is very real is since 2016, the government policies is not just about one area. You might notice that they got into battery production, they got into EV incentives, not just for the motorists or the drivers, but also for the manufacturing industry. And then they also got to support the infrastructure. Now, because of that, right now, they are phasing out. But the number of EV percentage has increased tremendously to create momentum. This is really for the government to decide. But more importantly, what I can say at the end of the day is there's no way such an industry can succeed if we do not collaborate.
Yes.
I mean, it's not for the private sector nor for the government to solve the problem. But if we believe in this agenda, then we have to collaborate with the government, with the industry, and with the community to make this happen.
Thank you.
I have another perspective on this, and that is that, I mean, we all know under FAME policies, some incentives, whether by way of registration, taxes, etc. At a big macro level, this issue has not yet been discussed at our levels or any level, because it's not hit us badly, because we still feel that fossil fuels will take us to another 15 years in terms of growth and revenue. Today, the state governments collect 2,60,000 crores every year on taxes on petrol and diesel. and the center collects similar amount by way of excise duty. So the bigger challenge would be if we were to become China in this space, 30, 40%, what is going to happen to the fiscal issues as far as the government is concerned? So that stage has not come. So I don't think government is worried at this point in time. These are all small, small things. There is growth. So if your, suggestion were to be implemented in a end state, then government has to think of how do we take care of 30, 40% of the revenue.
Absolutely.
So that's another issue, but the time has not come to discuss this.
Yeah.
It's too much into the long term.
Very good. I think we are out of time. Any final closing comments from my panelists before I just do a quick sum up?
I would say that it all, at the end of the day, is about capabilities. And so, for the capabilities to succeed, we need to find and develop our own people. That is the only way. I mean, that's where the imagination, the ideas, and the execution happen at the end of the day.
No, that's it's a perfect, as I was thinking of summing up, I think the 3 points: customer, capital, and capabilities, which I was going to sum up. So thank you for picking up on that. I think customer, what everyone said very clearly, like customer is at the center. We have to think about convenience, affordability, making it easy. So this is not a mandate that has to be rammed down the throat of the, and customer in every country is different. So you've got to really understand the unit economics, and in India it's always both the total cost of ownership but total cost of acquisition, both are important, right? And bridging that gap, right? Capital, of course, I think the financing models we touched upon, there's a huge investment in terms of the manufacturing, the enabling infrastructure, the unit economics, the vehicles at the hand of the users, leasing models that could be looked at, etc. So innovative and flexible ways of deploying capital. And then capabilities. I think there were many of these capabilities that were mentioned. I think one was around R&D. We talked about marketing. We talked about a number of other capabilities as part of the journey. And then maybe I'll add a fourth, which is collaboration, which is the fourth C on this, that several of the panelists talked about, that this is not about disruptors only or established companies only or government. So this is really an ecosystem that needs to come together. The imperative is very clear, and I think the journey started in India maybe 10 plus years ago, and it's continuing. And we look forward to the mobility transition, and not just electric mobility, but the overall mobility transition, accelerating and developing and delivering positive benefits to the customers, the community, and the country at large. Thank you very much.